August 12, 1878, West Texas. Jacob Brennan stood before 3 graves behind his ranch house. The wooden crosses were weathered gray, letters carved 8 years ago now barely visible in the harsh sunlight. Mary Brennan, beloved wife. Tommy Brennan, age 8. Mule Brennan, age 6. All 3 had died the same week in 1870. Plague fever had swept through Red River County that autumn, taking half the children and a quarter of the adults. Jake had buried his entire world in 6 days. 8 years. He counted every single one. His hand trembled as he pulled the whiskey bottle from his coat pocket. The morning sun was barely up, but Jake had stopped caring about proper drinking hours somewhere around year 3. The amber liquid caught the light, promising temporary forgetting. Temporary was all he had anymore. In his other hand, the Colt revolver hung heavy at his side. Cleaned and loaded. Always loaded. His pocket held $12. Crumpled bills that represented everything left of Jacob Brennan's life. The bank wanted $800 by month's end, or the ranch would be seized. 200 acres his grandfather had claimed in 1845, the land where Mary had planted roses, where Tommy had learned to ride, where Samuel had caught his first fish in the creek. All of it would be gone in 18 days. Jake took a long pull from the bottle. The whiskey burned, but not enough. Nothing burned enough to match the hollow ache in his chest that had lived there for 8 years. He had become a ghost haunting his own property, going through motions that no longer held meaning. Feed the last 3 horses. Ignore the broken fences. Pretend tomorrow might be different. It never was. He raised the bottle toward Mary's grave in a bitter toast. The August heat shimmered off the dry Texas earth, making the crosses waver like they might disappear entirely. Some days Jake wished they would. Some days he wished he could stop seeing their faces every time he closed his eyes. Tommy's gap-toothed grin. Samuel's serious brown eyes that looked just like Mary's. Mary herself laughing as she hung laundry, her hair catching the sunlight like spun copper. Dead. All dead. And Jake was still here, which felt like the cruelest joke God could play. The sound of a train whistle cut through the morning silence. The railroad crossing was 2 miles east, where the tracks cut through his property on their way to Red River. Jake checked his pocket watch. 7:15, right on schedule. The eastbound freight heading to Kansas City. He needed to ride into town today. Had to try one more time to negotiate with the bank, though he knew it was pointless. Martin Hayes at the First National Bank of Red River had been patient for years, but patience had limits. Everyone's did. Jake corked the bottle and shoved it back in his pocket. The Colt stayed on his hip. Old habits from the war died hard. He turned toward the barn, each step requiring conscious effort. Getting through each day was like walking through deep mud. Possible, but exhausting. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Another thing he should fix. Another thing that would outlast his ownership. He saddled the bay gelding, one of the 3 horses left from what had once been a herd of 20. Pride, his father used to say, was no substitute for pragmatism, but Jake had precious little of either anymore. As he led the horse out, movement near the railroad tracks caught his eye. Something pale against the dark earth. Probably a coyote. They'd been getting bolder, coming closer to the buildings. Jake swung into the saddle, intending to head straight for town. But the bay stamped nervously, ears pricked forward. Animals knew things. Jake had learned that in the war. When your horse got anxious, you paid attention. He turned the gelding toward the tracks. The railroad cut through the eastern section of his property, a scar of progress that had promised prosperity to Red River County. The town had grown from 300 souls to nearly 800 since the rails came through in 1872. Jake had watched the growth from a distance, participating in none of it. Growth meant new families, new children, things he couldn't bear to see. As he rode closer, the pale shape resolved into something that made his stomach drop. A woven basket, sitting directly on the railroad ties, centered between the rails. And from inside that basket came a sound that stopped Jake's heart. A baby crying. His hands locked on the reins. The bay danced sideways, sensing his sudden tension. The morning sun beat down on the metal rails, making them shimmer with heat. In 90 minutes, the westbound passenger train would come through, fast. The engineer wouldn't see a basket until it was too late. Jake sat frozen in the saddle. His chest constricted like an iron band was tightening around his ribs. A baby. There was a baby on those tracks. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but sit there while his mind filled with the sound of Tommy's last labored breaths. Samuel's fevered whimpering, Mary's hand going cold in his. The baby's cry grew stronger, angry now, angry, demanding attention the way infants do when the world fails to meet their needs. "Move!" Jake's mind screamed at his body. "Move, damn you!" But he had locked up. 8 years of frozen grief held him paralyzed while an innocent child lay in the path of a train that would turn that basket into nothing but splinters, and a memory that would destroy what little remained of Jake's sanity. The bay shifted again. Jake's hand went to the whiskey bottle by instinct, seeking the numbness that would let him ride away. Let someone else deal with this. Let someone else be the hero. He had used up all his heroism trying to save his own family and failing spectacularly. Then the baby's cry changed, became a sound of pure distress that cut through every defense Jake had built. He was off the horse before his conscious mind made the decision. His boots hit the ground and he was running, legs that had barely functioned for 8 years, suddenly remembering how to move with purpose. The rocky ground between the fence line and the tracks seemed to stretch forever, his breathing harsh in his ears. He reached the basket and dropped to his knees beside the rails. The crying stopped abruptly as the baby sensed his presence. Jake's hands shook so badly he could barely grip the basket's edge. Inside lay an infant. A girl, maybe 3 weeks old, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that had once been white. She had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on his face. Blue eyes, deep blue like a mountain lake. Not like Tommy's hazel, not like Samuel's brown. Different. This was a different child. Jake's breathing came in shallow gasps. His vision tunneled. He was having a panic attack, the kind that had plagued him for the first 2 years after the plague. Doc Walsh had given him laudanum back then, but Jake had learned that whiskey worked nearly as well and was easier to obtain. The baby made a soft sound, not crying now, almost curious. Her tiny hand escaped the blanket, fingers spreading wide. Jake noticed something else tucked beneath the baby's blanket. A gentleman's handkerchief, fine linen, completely out of place with the threadbare basket and desperate note. He pulled it out. The fabric was expensive, monogrammed with an ornate letter D, embroidered in dark blue thread, too fine for a desperate 17-year-old girl to own. Jake turned it over in his hand, studying the careful stitching. Someone else had been here, someone with money. The handkerchief didn't fit the story the note told. It was evidence of something he didn't yet understand. He stuffed it into his coat pocket without thinking further. The baby's immediate needs were more urgent than puzzles about expensive handkerchiefs, but the wrongness of it nagged at him as he gathered the basket into his arms. Pinned to the blanket was a scrap of paper. Jake's hands were shaking so hard he could barely unfold it. The writing was unsteady, done in pencil by someone whose hand had trembled as badly as his did now. "I am 17 and alone. She deserves better than me. Please." That was all. No name. No explanation beyond the obvious desperation of a mother too young and too overwhelmed to see any other choice. Jake looked up at the tracks stretching east and west. Empty now. But in 90 minutes, the westbound would come through at 40 miles an hour. The engineer would be watching for cattle on the crossing a mile ahead, not for a basket on the rails. Please. That word broke something in Jake. The careful walls he had built to keep the world at a distance cracked under the weight of that single, desperate plea. He gathered the basket into his arms. The baby made another soft sound, studying his face with that intense focus infants have before they learn to be afraid. She was warm and alive and completely dependent on whatever mercy the universe might show. The universe had shown Jake precious little mercy, but maybe he could show some. He stood, cradling the basket against his chest. The baby's eyes never left his face. She seemed to be waiting, trusting, believing that the giant holding her basket would make things right. The weight of that trust hit him like a physical blow. Jake turned and walked back to his horse on legs that barely supported him. Every step required monumental effort. The baby stayed quiet, as if she understood that her survival depended on his ability to function. He managed to mount while holding the basket, years of horsemanship making the motion automatic even while his mind reeled. He should take her to town, to the sheriff, to Doc Walsh, to someone who knew what to do with abandoned infants, someone who wasn't a broken drunk living in a collapsing ranch house with $12 and 18 days before eviction. But Jake turned the bay toward home instead, toward the house that had been empty of life for 8 years, toward the future he had stopped believing in. The baby made a small hiccuping sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. "I don't know," Jake said out loud, his voice rusty from disuse. He rarely spoke anymore, had no one to speak to. "I don't know what I'm doing." The baby seemed to accept this answer. She settled deeper into her blanket, her eyes drifting closed, trusting him to figure it out. Jake Brennan, who couldn't figure out how to get through a single day without whiskey, who woke up every morning wishing he hadn't, who stood at 3 graves and begged for the courage to put a bullet in his own head. That Jake Brennan was now responsible for keeping a 3-week-old infant alive. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity, or cry, or scream, but he did none of those things because the baby was sleeping now, and waking her seemed like the worst possible option. The ride back to the ranch house took forever and no time at all. Jake's mind spun in circles. What did babies need? Milk. Obviously milk. He had no milk. The house had been out of fresh supplies for weeks. He lived on hardtack, jerky, and whiskey. The baby would need changing. Probably needed it now, given the smell starting to emerge from the basket. Jake had no idea how to change a baby. Mary had handled all that with Tommy and Samuel. Jake had held them and played with them and taught them to ride, but the practical care had been Mary's domain. Mary, who had been dead for 8 years. Jake dismounted in front of the porch, still cradling the basket. The baby slept on, peaceful in her ignorance of how thoroughly unprepared her rescuer was. The house loomed before him, doors he hadn't opened in months, rooms he avoided because they held too many ghosts. He couldn't bring a baby into that tomb, but the alternative was taking her to town, and Jake found he couldn't do that either, not yet, not until he had time to think, time to understand why finding this child felt like the universe had reached down and grabbed him by the throat. "Please," the note had said, "please." "All right," Jake whispered to the sleeping infant. "All right, but just until I figure out what to do." The baby's hand curled into a tiny fist against the blanket. Her chest rose and fell with the easy breathing of the truly innocent. She had no idea that the man holding her was the least qualified person in Red River County to care for an infant. No idea that he woke up every morning wishing for death. No idea that the last time he'd felt anything other than crushing emptiness was the day he'd buried his family. Jake carried her inside. The house was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Exactly as he'd left it every morning for 8 years. The main room held furniture covered in dust. Mary's rocking chair sat empty by the cold fireplace. The kitchen through the doorway to the right had been bare of real cooking for so long the pots had rusted. He stood in the middle of the main room holding the basket, absolutely paralyzed by indecision. The baby woke up, her eyes opened, focused on his face again with that unnerving intensity, and then her face crumpled. The cry that emerged was surprisingly powerful for such a small creature, demanding, urgent, refusing to be ignored. "I know," Jake said helplessly. "I know. Just give me a minute to think." But thinking was beyond him. The baby's cries grew louder, more insistent. She was hungry, or wet, or both, probably both. And Jake Brennan, who had survived 4 years of war and 8 years of grief, had absolutely no idea what to do. He needed help, needed someone who understood babies, someone who could tell him how to make the crying stop before it broke whatever fragile thing had started to crack in his chest when he'd read that desperate note. The town. He had to go to the town. Jake placed the basket carefully in Mary's rocking chair, the irony not lost on him. The baby screamed louder, face turning red. Her little fists waved in outrage at being set down. 5 minutes, Jake told her. "Give me 5 minutes." He ran to the barn, saddled the bay with shaking hands, and rode for Red River like the devil himself was chasing him. The baby's cries followed him down the road, fading but never quite disappearing from his mind. Red River had grown since Jake last paid attention. New buildings lined Main Street. A proper hotel now stood where the old boarding house had been. The general store had expanded. People moved along the boardwalks with purpose, going about lives that had continued while Jake's had stopped. He tied the bay at the hitching post outside the general store and stood for a moment, trying to remember how to be around people. 8 years was a long time to be alone. Long enough to forget the rhythms of conversation, the expectations of society. The store's bell chimed as he pushed through the door. The smell hit him immediately. Leather and tobacco and coffee and 100 other scents of civilization. 3 customers browsed the shelves. Behind the counter stood Martha Evans, who ran the store with her husband. She looked up at the sound of the bell, and her eyes widened slightly. "Jacob Brennan," she said, surprise clear in her voice. "Haven't seen you in months." "Mrs. Evans," Jake's voice came out rough, "I need help." "Help with what?" Her expression shifted from surprise to concern. "You all right? You look pale." How did he even begin to explain? Jake opened his mouth and then closed it again, words failing completely. The bell chimed again. Someone else entered the store behind him. Jake turned and found himself looking at a woman he didn't recognize. Late 30s, he guessed, though weariness made her look older. Dressed in a traveling suit that had seen better days, she carried a carpet bag and had the defeated posture of someone who had reached the absolute end of their resources. "Excuse me," the woman said to Mrs. Evans. "I was told the telegraph office was next door." "That's right, honey, but Bill Thornton doesn't open until 8. Mrs. Evans studied the woman with the sharp eye of someone who could read desperation. "You need to send a wire?" "I need to find out if anyone has responded to my previous wires." The woman's voice was tight with stress. "I'm supposed to be meeting someone, a Mr. Thornton, but when I arrived yesterday, I was informed he passed away 3 months ago." Understanding dawned on Mrs. Evans' face. "Oh, Lord, you're the mail-order bride." The woman flinched at the blunt term, but nodded. "Abigail Parker, from Boston. I have all the correspondence. Everything was arranged. But now there's no one to meet me, and I'm out of money, and I don't know what to do." Jake stood frozen as the 2 women talked. Mail-order bride. He knew about those arrangements. Desperate women from back east corresponding with men on the frontier who needed wives. Sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it didn't. This clearly hadn't. "I have teaching experience," Abigail Parker continued, "and I can cook and clean and manage a household. Surely someone in town needs help. I can work for room and board until I earn enough for train fare back to Boston." "Teaching?" Mrs. Evans looked thoughtful. "We don't have a school yet, though folks have been talking about starting one, but let me think on who might need household help." Jake's mind made a connection so sudden and desperate it bypassed all rational thought. "I need help," he heard himself say. Both women turned to stare at him. Abigail Parker's eyes were green, he noticed. A clear, sharp green that suggested a quick mind behind them. "I'm sorry," she said. "Jacob Brennan." He stuck out his hand automatically. Abigail shook it with a firm grip that surprised him. I have a ranch outside town, and I need someone who knows about babies." "Babies?" Abigail's eyebrows rose. "You have children, Mr. Brennan?" "No, yes, not mine. I found one." The words tumbled out in a confused rush. "This morning, on the railroad tracks. Someone left her there, and I don't know what to do. She's crying, and I don't know how to make it stop." The confession hung in the air. Both women stared at him like he'd sprouted a second head. "You found a baby," Mrs. Evans said slowly, "on the tracks. In a basket, with a note," the mother said, "please." Jake knew he sounded insane, felt insane. "I took her back to my ranch, but she's crying and she probably needs milk and changing, and I don't know how to do any of that." "Where is she now?" Abigail's question was sharp, concerned. "At my house, in the rocking chair." "You left an infant alone?" Abigail's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Mr. Brennan, we need to get back there immediately." "That's what I'm trying to do, but I need help. I don't know anything about babies." He looked directly at Abigail Parker. "You said you need work, room and board. I can offer that. $20 a month if you can teach me how to keep that baby alive." "You want to hire me to care for an abandoned infant?" Abigail said it like she was testing the words to see if they made sense. "To teach me how to care for her until I figure out what to do next." Jake was already moving toward the door. "I have to get back. She shouldn't be alone." "Wait." Abigail picked up her carpetbag. "You're serious. You found an abandoned baby, and you want to hire me to help care for it." "Her, not it. Her." Jake held the door open. "Are you coming or not?" Abigail Parker looked at Mrs. Evans, who shrugged with the universal gesture of stranger things have happened in Texas. Then she looked back at Jake, studying him, measuring something. "Your ranch, where is it?" 2 miles east, on the railroad line." "And you have a room where I could stay, separate from your quarters?" "I have a whole house. I've been living in the barn." That was an exaggeration, but only slight. Jake slept wherever he passed out, which was often the barn. "You can have the entire house if you want it. Just help me keep that baby alive." "I raised 4 younger siblings after my mother died," Abigail said quietly. "I know about caring for infants. But, Mr. Brennan, we need to involve the sheriff. An abandoned child is a legal matter." "After," Jake said. "After she stops crying and we make sure she's all right. Please." There was that word again. Please. The word that had cracked his defenses when he'd read it on that note. The word he now used like a weapon against this stranger's reasonable objections. Abigail Parker closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with the expression of someone making a potentially terrible decision. "All right, let's go see about this baby." The ride back to the ranch was the longest 2 miles of Jake's life. He pushed the bay harder than he should have, Abigail riding behind him on the saddle with her carpetbag clutched tight. She didn't complain, even though the pace had to be uncomfortable. He could hear the baby crying before they even reached the house. The sound carried across the empty land like an accusation. "How could you leave me alone?" it seemed to say. "I trusted you." Jake practically fell off the horse. He ran into the house with Abigail close behind him. The baby was exactly where he'd left her, screaming with the full force of her tiny lungs. Her face was purple with rage and fear and abandonment. Abigail dropped her carpetbag and went straight to the rocking chair. She lifted the baby with practiced ease, cradling the infant against her shoulder and making soft, shushing sounds. The crying didn't stop immediately, but it modulated, became less panicked. "She's soaked through," Abigail said, her hands efficiently checking the baby. "And she's dehydrated. How long has it been since you found her?" Jake checked his pocket watch. "An hour and a half." "And you have no milk? No clean cloths?" Abigail looked around the dusty, neglected room. "Mr. Brennan, this house is not suitable for an infant." "I know." Shame burned in his chest. "I know. That's why I need help." Abigail studied him for a long moment while the baby fussed against her shoulder. Whatever she saw in his face made her expression soften slightly. "All right. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to ride back to town and buy supplies. I'll give you a list." While you're gone, I'll clean one room enough to be safe for her. When you get back, we'll feed her and get her comfortable. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Agreed?" Jake nodded, grateful to have someone tell him what to do, grateful to have the responsibility shared, even temporarily. Abigail rattled off a list of necessities: milk, sugar, bottles, soft cloth for diapers, soap, blankets. The list went on. Jake committed it to memory, too rushed to write anything down. "And Mr. Brennan?" Abigail's green eyes fixed on him. "While you're in town, talk to the sheriff. Tell him what you found. This baby has a mother somewhere who made a desperate choice. People need to know." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to keep this contained, private, not involving the law that might take the baby away, but Abigail was right. This wasn't just about him. He nodded again and ran back out to the bay. The horse was exhausted, but responded when Jake urged him back toward town. Behind him, through the open door, he could hear Abigail singing to the baby. A lullaby, soft and sweet and full of comfort. The crying was getting quieter. Red River was busier now. Mid-morning brought out the shoppers and the businessmen. Jake tied the bay at the general store again and went inside with Abigail's list burning in his memory. Mrs. Evans raised her eyebrows when she saw him back so soon but didn't comment, just helped him gather everything, her expression knowing. At the counter, as she tallied his purchases, she said quietly, "You're doing a good thing, Jacob." "I don't know what I'm doing. Most new parents don't." She wrapped the milk bottles in paper. "Your total is $7.60. Jake counted out the bills, watching his $12 shrink to $4 and change. But babies needed supplies more than he needed whiskey. That was a new thought, an uncomfortable one. From the general store, he went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Briggs was older than Jake remembered, or maybe Jake just hadn't noticed the gray in the man's hair the last time they'd spoken, which had been years ago. Briggs looked up from his desk when Jake entered, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Brennan, didn't expect to see you." "Found something this morning, Sheriff. Thought you should know." Jake explained about the basket on the tracks, the note. Taking the baby back to his ranch, Briggs listened without interrupting, his expression growing graver. "You should have brought her straight here," Briggs said when Jake finished. "I know, but she was crying and I didn't know what to do and I couldn't think straight." Briggs studied him. "You all right, Jake? You look like hell." "I'm managing." The lie was automatic. "Word around town is you've been managing with a bottle. That true?" Jake didn't answer. Didn't need to. His silence said everything. Briggs sighed. "Look, about the baby. Proper procedure is to take her to the county orphanage in Helena. That's the law. Abandoned children go into state care until a home can be found." Something cold settled in Jake's chest. "How long does that take? Finding a home?" "Depends. Could be weeks, could be months. Orphanage is overcrowded as it is." Briggs pulled out a form. "I'll need to make a report. Description of the baby, where you found her, what the note said. Then I'll contact Helena and arrange transport." "When?" "Train goes through tomorrow morning. I'll have one of the matrons from the church accompany her." Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours. Jake's hands clenched into fists. What if I wanted to keep her? The words surprised both of them. Briggs looked up sharply. "Keep her? Jake, you can barely keep yourself together. No offense, but a man who lives on whiskey isn't suitable to raise an infant." "I stopped drinking. Today. This morning." Another lie, but one Jake intended to make true. "And I hired help. A woman from Boston who knows about babies. She's at the ranch now, taking care of things." "A woman?" Briggs' tone suggested he knew exactly what kind of arrangement this might be. A mail-order bride who showed up for a dead man. She needs work. "I need help. It's a practical arrangement." Jake leaned forward. "Sheriff, I found that baby. I pulled her off those tracks before the train could kill her. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for you doing the right thing in the moment. Doesn't mean you're equipped to raise a child." Briggs wasn't being cruel, just honest. "Jake, I remember what you were like before the plague. Good man, good father, but that was 8 years ago. You've been a ghost since then. Living out there alone, drinking yourself to death slowly, that's no environment for a baby. Every word was true. Jake knew it. But he also knew that for the first time in 8 years, he'd felt something other than crushing emptiness. Fear, yes. Panic, certainly. But also a desperate need to keep that infant safe, to not fail another child. "Give me a chance," Jake said. "Don't send her to Helena tomorrow. Give me a week. Let me prove I can do this." "And if you can't, what happens to her then?" "Then I'll bring her to you myself, and you can send her wherever the law requires." Jake met the sheriff's eyes. 1 week, that's all I'm asking." Briggs was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sounds of town life continued, wagons rolling past, people calling greetings to each other, the normal rhythms of a community that had moved on while Jake stayed frozen. "I could lose my job for this," Briggs finally said. "Bending the rules on child welfare. I'm not asking you to bend anything, just delay. 1 week before you file the official report. Give me a chance to get things in order." Another long silence. Then Briggs pulled the report form toward himself and began writing. But slowly. Very slowly. "I'll give you 3 days. That's it. 3 days to prove you can provide a proper home, clean house, suitable help, evidence you can care for an infant. I'll come out on Friday to inspect. If I'm not satisfied, the baby goes to Helena on Saturday's train. Understood?" 3 days, 72 hours. It wasn't much, but it was more than Jake had hoped for. "Understood. Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet. I'm serious about this inspection, Jake. That baby deserves better than a drunk's broken ranch." Briggs' expression softened slightly. "But I remember who you used to be. Maybe this is what you need to become him again." Jake left the sheriff's office with supplies weighing down his saddlebags and a deadline burning in his mind. 3 days. He had 3 days to transform his house from a tomb into a home. 3 days to prove he could be someone other than the ghost he'd become. The bay knew the way home by now. Jake let the horse set the pace while his mind spun. Clean the house. Make it safe for a baby. Show the sheriff he was serious. And most important, keep that infant alive and healthy. He could do this. He had to do this. Because the alternative was sending her to an overcrowded orphanage in Helena. And Jake knew exactly what those places were like. He'd visited enough of them after the war, looking for displaced children of soldiers he'd served with. Cold buildings full of crying children and overworked staff. Places where kids learned that the world was harsh and love was a luxury reserved for the lucky. That baby deserved better. When he rode up to the ranch house, he could hear singing through the open windows. Abigail's voice, clear and steady. Working through a lullaby he vaguely remembered Mary singing to Tommy and Samuel. The sound stopped him for a moment, frozen in the saddle. His house, which had been silent for 8 years, had music in it again. Jake dismounted and carried the supplies inside. Abigail looked up from the rocking chair where she sat with the baby. The infant was clean now, wrapped in what looked like one of Jake's own shirts torn into makeshift swaddling. She was sleeping peacefully, her tiny face relaxed. "You got everything?" Abigail's voice was quiet, careful not to wake the baby. Jake nodded and set down the parcels. "Sheriff knows. Gave me 3 days to prove I can care for her. He's coming Friday to inspect." 3 days. Abigail looked around the dusty room. "We'll need more than 3 days to make this house suitable." "Then we'd better get started." For the first time in 8 years, Jacob Brennan had a purpose beyond simple survival. He had a deadline, a goal, a reason to care whether tomorrow came. He had a baby to protect, and 3 days to figure out how. The first week with Sarah transformed Jacob Brennan's ranch from a monument to grief into something that almost resembled a home. Sheriff Briggs rode away Friday afternoon, his inspection complete, leaving behind a gift of 3 days before Judge Clayton Mercer would arrive to render final judgment. 3 days wasn't much, but for a man who'd spent 8 years wishing for death, 3 days felt like a miracle. Jake stood on the porch, watching dust rise from the sheriff's departing horse. Sarah slept against his chest, her small weight no longer terrifying but somehow grounding. Abigail stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression troubled despite their temporary victory. "Mercer won't be as easy as Briggs," she said quietly. "A circuit judge who owns half the county doesn't bend rules for anyone." "Then we make sure he has no rules to bend." Jake looked down at Sarah's sleeping face. "Make everything so proper he can't find fault." "In 3 days? We've done more in less time." That evening, after Sarah had been fed and changed and settled in her cradle, Jake and Abigail sat at the kitchen table, making plans. The lamp burned low between them, casting shadows across Abigail's face as she wrote lists with determined precision. "Mercer will question everything," she said, her pencil moving steadily across the paper. "Your finances, your drinking history, our living arrangement. We need answers for all of it." Jake leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at him. 6 days without whiskey had left him shaky and raw, every nerve exposed. But Sarah's presence kept him focused, kept him from reaching for the bottle he'd poured out that first morning. "My finances are what they are. I owe the bank $800, due in 2 weeks. He spread his hands on the table. "Can't change that fact. But you can show you're working. That fence job starts Monday. How much does it pay?" $40 for 3 days. Abigail added it to her list. "That's something. Shows you're employed, actively trying to improve your situation." She tapped the pencil against her lips, thinking, "What about your drinking? How do we address that?" The question hung heavy in the air. Jake's hands clenched into fists on the table. "Truth, I guess. That I've been drunk for 8 years. That finding Sarah made me stop. That I'm 6 days sober and fighting to stay that way. 6 days won't impress a judge. It's all I've got." Abigail was quiet for a moment, studying him across the table. The lamplight caught in her green eyes, making them seem to glow. "Then we make him understand that every day counts. That 6 days for a man like you is the equivalent of 6 months for someone else. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough." She set down her pencil. "I know you lost everything 8 years ago. I know you've been living half dead ever since. I know that finding Sarah woke something in you that had been sleeping. That's the story we tell Mercer. Not about failure, about redemption." Jake wanted to believe her, wanted to think that a judge would see past his history to his intentions. But experience had taught him that the world didn't reward intentions. It rewarded results and respectability, and things Jake had none of. Saturday afternoon brought an unwelcome visitor. Jake was repairing the fence near the house when he heard hoofbeats. He looked up to see David Mercer dismounting, his deputy's badge gleaming in the sunlight. "Deputy," Jake said, straightening, keeping his voice neutral. "Brennan." David's eyes swept over the property, taking note of every improvement. The mended fences, the cleaned yard, the fresh paint on the porch. "Just doing a preliminary inspection before Tuesday's hearing. My father likes to be thorough. Sheriff Briggs already inspected on Friday." "My father is not Sheriff Briggs." David pulled out a small notebook. "May I see the child?" Jake led him inside where Abigail was feeding Sarah. The deputy's gaze lingered on the domestic scene, his expression unreadable. He made notes without speaking. "The baby appears healthy," David said after a moment. "You've done better than expected." He walked to the basket where Sarah had been sleeping, studying it with uncomfortable intensity. "This is where you keep her?" "During the day, yes." David's eyes swept the room again, then landed on Jake. "Tell me again about finding her. Exactly where on the railroad tracks?" "East section of my property, right on the rails between the ties." "And there was nothing else with her? No other items besides the basket and blanket?" The question was too specific, too careful. Jake's hand moved unconsciously to his coat pocket where the monogrammed handkerchief still rested, tucked away since that first morning. He'd meant to give it to Sheriff Briggs, but had forgotten in the chaos. Some instinct made him hold back now. Just the basket blanket and a note from the mother, Jake said, watching David's face carefully. David's shoulders relaxed fractionally. The tension Jake hadn't even noticed eased from the deputy's posture. I see. Well, I'll report back to my father. He closed his notebook with a sharp snap. As David moved toward the door, he paused, his hand on the frame. His eyes went to Sarah one more time, and for just a moment something flickered across his face. Recognition? Fear? Guilt? It passed too quickly for Jake to read, but it left him deeply uneasy. One more thing, Brennan. David's voice was cold now. Don't get too attached to that baby. My father's already decided she belongs in Helena. Tuesday's hearing is just a formality. No amount of fence mending or house cleaning will change his mind. The certainty in his voice sent ice through Jake's veins. This wasn't a warning. It was a promise. David mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Jake standing in the doorway, his hand still resting on the handkerchief in his pocket. The expensive fabric felt wrong against his calloused fingers, evidence of something he didn't yet understand. After David left, Jake stood in the yard long after the dust had settled. Something wasn't right. The deputy's questions had been too pointed, his interest in Sarah too intense. And that moment of fear when Jake mentioned the basket. David Mercer knew more about Sarah's origins than he was saying. Jake pulled out the handkerchief, studying the ornate letter D in the fading light. Whoever had left this with Sarah had money, power, and something told Jake that David's visit hadn't been about inspection at all. It had been about making sure Jake didn't know too much. He tucked the handkerchief back into his pocket and walked inside, where Abigail was settling Sarah for her afternoon nap. There's another problem, Abigail continued, her voice dropping. David Mercer, the deputy. He made it clear that our living arrangement looks improper. Unmarried man and woman under one roof. That undermines everything. I gave you the bedroom. I sleep out here. That's proper enough. Is it? Abigail met his eyes directly. Or does it just look like we're pretending to be proper while actually living as man and wife? The implication stung. Jake straightened in his chair. I've been nothing but respectful. Never even thought about anything else. I know that. You know that. But Mercer doesn't. All he'll see is appearances. She picked up her pencil again, rolling it between her fingers. There's a solution, one that would eliminate that objection entirely. What solution? We could get married. The words landed like a physical blow. Jake's mind went blank, then filled with 1,000 objections, all trying to surface at once. Married? He repeated stupidly. A legal arrangement, on paper, nothing more. Abigail spoke quickly now, as if afraid she'd lose courage. It would give Sarah 2 parents. Make our household completely proper. Remove any question about our relationship. That's insane. Is it? We're already living together, already caring for Sarah as if she's ours. Marriage just makes it official. She leaned forward. Think about it, Jake. What's Mercer's strongest argument against you? That you're a single man with no support system. But a married couple, that's stable. That's respectable. Jake pushed back from the table, too agitated to sit still. He paced to the window, looking out at darkness broken only by starlight. Married. To a woman he'd known for 6 days. For a baby he'd found on railroad tracks. The absurdity of it threatened to choke him. You don't want to marry me, he said without turning around. You came west for a fresh start, not to tie yourself to a broken drunk with a failing ranch. I came west running from debts I couldn't pay and scandal I couldn't escape. Found instead a child who needs protecting and a man who needs hope. Abigail's voice was steady. Maybe we can help each other, Jake. Maybe that's enough. It's not fair to you. Life hasn't been particularly fair to either of us. But we can make it fair for Sarah. The sound of her chair scraping back, footsteps approaching. I'm not asking for a real marriage, just a legal one. Partners in keeping that baby safe, nothing more. Jake turned to face her. Abigail stood in the middle of the kitchen, lamplight painting gold edges around her silhouette. She looked determined and frightened in equal measure, offering something enormous while trying to pretend it was small. "If we do this," Jake said slowly, "there's no going back. Marriage is legal, binding. Can't just undo it when the judge leaves town." "I know." "And what happens after? When Sarah's settled and doesn't need us playing house anymore?" "Then we figure it out." Abigail wrapped her arms around herself. "But that's months away, Jake. Right now, Tuesday is coming fast, and we need every advantage we can get." From the bedroom came a soft cry. Sarah, waking for her midnight feeding. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. Both adults turned toward it, drawn by the helpless need of an infant who had no idea her entire future hung on decisions being made in a darkened kitchen. "I'll get her bottle ready," Jake said. "I'll change her." They moved together, the familiar routine of childcare providing escape from impossible questions. But as Jake heated milk in the kitchen, testing temperature on his wrist, Abigail's proposal echoed in his mind. Marriage. Legal protection for Sarah. Stability in the eyes of the law. It made cold, practical sense, which was exactly why it terrified him. That night, Jake lay on his pallet in the main room, listening to Abigail rock Sarah back to sleep. Her soft singing drifted through the closed bedroom door, a lullaby Mary used to sing to Tommy and Samuel. The sound cracked something open in Jake's chest, releasing pain and longing he'd kept carefully locked away. If he married Abigail, it would be the final betrayal of Mary's memory, the final admission that his first life was truly dead and buried behind the house. But if he didn't marry Abigail, Sarah might be taken away, sent to an orphanage where she'd learn that the world was cold and love was conditional. Which betrayal could he live with? By dawn, Jake had made his decision. He found Abigail in the kitchen, already dressed and preparing breakfast. Coffee scented the air. Through the window, sunrise painted the horizon in shades of fire. "Yes," he said without preamble. Abigail turned from the stove, question in her eyes. "I'll marry you." The words came in a rush before he could reconsider. "If you're sure. If this is really what you want, we'll do it before Tuesday. Make everything legal and proper for Sarah's sake." Abigail nodded slowly, relief and something else crossing her face. "Monday morning then, before your fence work starts. Reverend Price should be in town. We can ask him to perform the ceremony." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She poured coffee with steady hands. "Unless you want time to reconsider?" Jake took the cup she offered. The coffee was hot and strong and real. Solid in a world that had gone sideways. "No. If we're doing this, better to do it fast, before either of us thinks too hard about it." The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Jake worked on the ranch, fixing years of neglect in desperate sprints of activity. Broken fences mended, the barn door rehung, cleaning and organizing and trying to make everything look like a man who had his life together lived here. Abigail cared for Sarah with practiced efficiency while also managing the household. Real meals appeared on the table. Laundry got washed. The house began to smell like something other than dust and abandonment. They existed in a strange bubble of almost family, playing parts they'd been assigned by circumstance, learning to work together while avoiding any discussion of what Monday's ceremony would actually mean. Saturday evening brought an unexpected visitor. Jake was in the barn when he heard hoofbeats. He stepped outside to see Doc Walsh dismounting, medical bag in hand. "Evening, Jake. Thought I'd check on the baby, make sure she's thriving before Tuesday's hearing." Relief washed through Jake. "Appreciate that, Doc. Come on in." Walsh examined Sarah thoroughly while Abigail hovered nearby, answering questions about feeding schedules and sleep patterns. The old doctor's weathered face revealed nothing until he'd completed his inspection. "She's gained weight," Walsh announced. "Good color, alert and responsive. No signs of neglect or poor care." He looked up at Jake and Abigail. "You're doing well with her, better than I'd hoped, honestly." "We're trying," Jake said. "I can see that." Walsh packed his instruments. "I'll write a full medical report for Judge Mercer. State clearly that Sarah is thriving in your care. Medical testimony carries weight with judges." "Why are you helping us?" Abigail asked quietly. "You barely know us." Walsh paused, considering his answer. Because 8 years ago, I watched a good man bury his family and then bury himself. Thought Jake Brennan was lost for good. But this baby, she's brought him back to the living. That's worth supporting. After Walsh left, Jake stood in the yard watching the doctor's silhouette fade into dusk. Behind him, through the open door, he could hear Abigail singing to Sarah. The sounds of life in a house that had been dead for so long. Tomorrow, he said to the empty air, to Mary's grave behind the house, to whatever ghosts still lingered. Tomorrow I marry another woman, not because I love her, not because I've forgotten you, but because a baby needs parents, and I'm trying to be one. I hope you understand. The wind whispered through dry grass. No answer came, but Jake hadn't really expected one. Sunday morning dawned gray and cool, unusual for August in Texas. Jake, dressed in his only suit, pulled from a trunk where it had languished for 8 years. The black fabric smelled of mothballs and regret. He fumbled with the collar, his hand shaking too badly to manage the buttons. "Here!" Abigail appeared in the doorway, Sarah in her arms. "Let me help." She passed the baby to Jake and began fastening his collar with quick, efficient fingers. This close, Jake could smell lavender soap and milk and something uniquely Abigail. Her touch was impersonal but gentle. The touch of someone who knew how to care for others without expecting anything in return. "There," she said, stepping back. "You look respectable." "I look like a man going to his own funeral." You look like a father preparing to fight for his daughter." Abigail's eyes were fierce. "Hold on to that today, when people stare, when they whisper. Remember why we're doing this." The ride to Red River felt endless. Jake drove the wagon with Sarah bundled between him and Abigail. The baby slept peacefully, ignorant of the stares that would follow them, ignorant that today was about changing perception, about becoming respectable enough to keep her. Red River's church stood white and stark against the gray sky. Its bell was already ringing, calling the faithful to Sunday service. Jake tied the wagon and helped Abigail down, acutely aware of how many eyes watched from windows and doorways. Inside, the church smelled of wood polish and old hymnals. Families filled the pews, children squirming in Sunday clothes, adults nodding greetings to neighbors. Conversation died as Jake entered with Abigail and Sarah. Silence spread like plague. Jake forced himself to walk down the center aisle, found an empty pew near the back, sat down with Abigail beside him, Sarah cradled in her arms. Every eye in the building tracked their movement. Whispers started like rustling leaves. Then Sarah made a sound, a happy gurgle that shattered the tension. Several women smiled. The spell broke. Normal conversation resumed, though Jake could feel speculation following him like smoke. Reverend Samuel Price was younger than Jake expected. Maybe 45, with the weathered face of a man who'd spent years traveling between frontier towns. His eyes found Jake immediately when he reached the pulpit. Surprise registered, then something warmer. Approval, maybe. The service proceeded with hymns and scripture and a sermon about lost sheep. Price spoke about shepherds who left 99 to save one, about the value of a single soul. Jake tried to focus, but his mind kept sliding forward to tomorrow, to Judge Mercer and the arguments he'd have to make. After the service, people approached cautiously. Mrs. Evans from the general store came first, cooing over Sarah and telling Abigail what a fine job she'd done getting the baby healthy. Sheriff Briggs nodded from across the room, wordless support. Doc Walsh shook Jake's hand with a grip that said, "Keep fighting." But not everyone was friendly. Jake spotted David Mercer near the door, watching with cold calculation. The deputy made notes in a small book, recording who spoke to Jake, who showed support, building evidence for his father's case. When most of the congregation had left, Reverend Price approached. He looked at Sarah with gentle curiosity, then at Jake and Abigail with something sharper. "I heard about the baby you found," Price said. "About what you're trying to do. That takes courage, Mr. Brennan. Takes more than I've got, Reverend. That's why we need your help." Jake glanced at Abigail, drawing strength from her steady presence. "We'd like to get married. Tomorrow morning, if you're available." Price's eyebrows climbed. "That's rather sudden." "It's necessary," Abigail said firmly. "Judge Mercer arrives Tuesday. We need to present a stable family situation. Being married eliminates questions about our living arrangement." The Reverend studied them both with eyes that had seen every kind of human desperation. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not a legal strategy. We understand that." Jake met his gaze directly. "But Sarah needs parents who can keep her safe, legal parents. We're prepared to be that for her." Price was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the last of the congregation dispersed into Sunday afternoon. The church felt vast and empty around the four of them. "All right," Price finally said. "Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, here at the church. You'll need 2 witnesses. Can you arrange that?" "We'll find them," Abigail promised. Walking out into gray daylight, Jake felt the weight of commitment settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Tomorrow he'd be married. To a woman he'd known barely a week. For reasons that had everything to do with survival and nothing to do with love. "Mary, forgive me," he thought. But he knew Mary would have understood, would have approved of anything that protected an innocent child. That afternoon, Jake approached Mrs. Evans at the general store. The older woman was reorganizing shelves, her movements efficient despite her age. "Mrs. Evans, I need to ask a favor." She turned, flour dusting her apron. "What kind of favor?" "Would you witness a wedding tomorrow, mine and Miss Parker's?" Understanding dawned on Mrs. Evans' face. "Oh, Jacob, you're really doing this?" "For Sarah, to make everything legal and proper before the judge arrives." Mrs. Evans' eyes went misty. "Of course I'll witness. It's a good thing you're doing, both of you." She reached out and squeezed Jake's hand. "Your Mary would be proud." The mention of his first wife hit like a punch. Jake managed to nod and mumble thanks before escaping the store. Outside, he leaned against the hitching post, breathing hard, fighting memories that threatened to drown him. Sheriff Briggs found him there 10 minutes later. "You all right, Jake?" "Getting married tomorrow, to Abigail. Need a second witness." "You willing?" Briggs didn't hesitate. "Of course. 8 o'clock at the church?" "Yeah." The sheriff studied him with knowing eyes. "This is smart. Gives you a stronger case with Mercer, but it's also a big step. You sure you're ready?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "That's all any of us can do." Briggs clapped him on the shoulder. "See you tomorrow morning." Jake returned to the ranch as the sun was setting. Abigail had dinner waiting, Sarah already fed and sleeping. They ate in silence, the weight of tomorrow's ceremony hanging between them like fog. "Nervous?" Abigail finally asked. "Terrified. Me too." She set down her fork. "But we're doing the right thing. For Sarah. Keep telling myself that. Then keep believing it." Abigail stood, beginning to clear dishes. "This isn't about us, Jake. It's about giving that baby every possible chance. If that means getting married, then that's what we do." Her practical certainty steadied him. Jake helped with the dishes, grateful for routine and simple tasks. Later, as Abigail prepared for bed, he sat on the porch with Sarah sleeping against his chest. The Texas night was vast and star-filled. Somewhere out there, Sarah's birth mother was living with the choice she'd made, wondering perhaps if her baby had survived, if someone had found her, if she was safe. "She's safe," Jake whispered to the darkness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Mercer decides, I'll make sure she's safe." Sarah stirred, her tiny hand gripping his shirt, holding on even in sleep, trusting him completely. Jake would not fail that trust. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Jake woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep. He lay on his pallet watching darkness fade to gray, listening to Abigail move quietly in the bedroom, Sarah's soft breathing audible through the door. Today, he would marry a stranger. Today, everything would change. He rose and dressed with shaking hands. His suit felt like a costume, His face in the mirror looked like a stranger's, pale and drawn and terrified. "You can do this," he told his reflection. "For Sarah. You can do this." Abigail emerged from the bedroom carrying Sarah, both of them dressed for the occasion. She'd done something different with her hair, pinning it up with a few loose curls framing her face. She looked beautiful and scared and determined. "Ready?" she asked. "No, but let's go anyway." The ride to town passed in silence. Sarah dozed in Abigail's arms. The morning was cool enough that their breath misted. By the time they reached Red River, Jake's hands had gone numb on the reins. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. At the church, Reverend Price was waiting. Mrs. Evans arrived moments later, her face bright with happy tears. Sheriff Briggs came last, looking official and supportive. They gathered before the altar, Jake and Abigail facing Price, the witnesses behind them. Sarah stirred but didn't wake. Morning light filtered through plain glass windows, painting everything in soft gold. Price opened his Bible. His voice when he spoke was gentle but firm. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Jake like waves. He'd heard them before, 17 years ago, standing beside Mary in a different church. That ceremony had been full of hope and love and the promise of a future together. This one was full of desperation and necessity and the fragile hope that legal papers would be enough to save a child. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Price continued, "but reverently, soberly, and in the fear of God." Jake's hands were shaking. Abigail reached over and took one, her grip warm and steady, anchoring him when he wanted to run. "Do you, Jacob Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The words stuck in Jake's throat. This was it, the point of no return. He looked at Abigail, at her green eyes steady on his, at Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I do." His voice came out hoarse but clear. "Do you, Abigail Parker, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Abigail's voice was stronger than his had been. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Price closed his Bible. "You may kiss your bride." Jake hesitated. They hadn't discussed this part. Didn't know how to navigate the space between legal requirement and personal boundaries. Abigail solved the problem by leaning forward and brushing her lips against his cheek. Brief, chaste, enough to satisfy tradition without pretending this was something it wasn't. Sarah chose that moment to wake. Her cry broke the solemn moment, bringing laughter from Mrs. Evans and a smile from Briggs. Abigail rocked the baby, making soothing sounds while Price prepared the marriage certificate. "Sign here," he said, presenting the document. Jacob Brennan signed his name with a hand that barely trembled. Beside his signature, Abigail added hers in neat script. Abigail Parker Brennan. A new identity. A new person created by necessity. Mrs. Evans and Briggs signed as witnesses. Price added his official seal. Just like that, it was done. Legal, binding, real, in the eyes of the law, if nowhere else. "Congratulations," Price said quietly. "May God bless your family and give you strength for what's ahead." Family. The word echoed in Jake's mind as they left the church. That's what they were now. A family. Not by blood or even by choice, but by determination to protect something innocent and precious. Jake had work waiting. 3 days of fence repair for a rancher 10 miles north. $40 they desperately needed. He kissed Sarah's forehead, nodded to Abigail, and rode out with the marriage certificate folded in his pocket. The fence work was brutal. Jake labored under the August sun for 10 hours straight, his hands blistering, his back screaming. But the physical pain was almost welcome. It gave him something to focus on besides tomorrow's confrontation with Judge Mercer. He returned home each evening to find Abigail waiting with dinner and Sarah sleeping peacefully. They'd eat in exhausted silence, then spend an hour rehearsing what they'd say to the judge. "What if he asks about your drinking?" Abigail would prompt. "I'll tell him I'm 8 days sober, that Sarah gave me a reason to stop. What if he says that's not enough time? Then I'll tell him every journey starts with a single day, that I'm committed to staying sober for her." Round and round they went, building their case like soldiers preparing defenses. By Monday night, Jake's head was spinning with rehearsed answers he prayed would sound natural tomorrow. "We're as ready as we'll ever be," Abigail finally said. It was past midnight. Sarah had been fed and changed and was sleeping soundly. Tomorrow would arrive in hours, whether they were prepared or not. Jake walked Abigail to the bedroom door. They stood awkwardly, married now but still strangers, partners in a desperate gamble. "Thank you," Jake said quietly, "for everything, for staying, for helping, for marrying me even though I've given you nothing but trouble." "You gave me a purpose," Abigail replied. Her hand rested on the doorframe, her eyes serious. "I came west running from debts and scandal, found instead a child who needed protecting and a man who needed hope. That's worth more than comfort." She went in, closing the door softly. Jake returned to his pallet, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept racing forward to tomorrow afternoon, to the town hall, to Judge Clayton Mercer, and whatever judgment he'd render. Jake rose before dawn, too restless to lie still. He went outside and stood in the yard, watching the sky lighten in the east. Tuesday had arrived, the day that would determine Sarah's future, and his own. Behind the house, 3 graves stood silent in the pre-dawn light. Mary, Tommy, Samuel. His first family, lost to plague and grief. Today he'd fight to keep his second family together, fight to prove that broken men could still be fathers. That love wasn't about biology, but about choosing to show up every day. "I won't fail her," Jake whispered to the graves. "Whatever it takes, I won't fail Sarah the way I failed to save you." The sun broke over the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of blood and fire. A new day. The day everything would change. One way or another, by sunset Jake would know if he was truly a father or just a man who'd tried and lost. He turned back toward the house where Abigail was stirring, where Sarah would soon wake crying for her morning bottle. His family. Legal now, real in the only ways that mattered. Time to fight for them. The Red River Town Hall was built of pale stone that seemed to absorb heat like a furnace. By noon on Tuesday, the building radiated waves of dry warmth that shimmered in the August air. Jake stood on the steps, Sarah in his arms, Abigail beside him, and felt sweat trickle down his spine beneath his Sunday suit. Inside those walls, Judge Clayton Mercer was already waiting, the most powerful man in 3 counties, the man who would decide if Sarah stayed or went to the orphanage in Helena, the man who held their future in his hands. "We should go in," Abigail said quietly. Her face was pale beneath her bonnet, but her voice stayed steady. "Better early than late." Jake nodded but couldn't make his feet move. Sarah squirmed in his arms, making small sounds of discomfort. Even the baby sensed something wrong, sensed the fear radiating from the adults holding her. "Jake," Abigail's hand on his arm. "Whatever happens in there, we fight. We don't give up. Agreed?" "Agreed." They climbed the steps together. The door opened into a hallway that smelled of dust and old paper and too many bodies in too small a space. Voices drifted from the main chamber. Jake recognized Sheriff Briggs' low rumble, Doc Walsh's reedy tenor, other voices he didn't know. The chamber itself was designed to intimidate. High ceiling, windows placed too high to see out of, a raised platform at one end where the judge would sit in literal judgment over everyone below. Wooden benches lined both sides, already half filled with townspeople curious about the hearing. David Mercer stood near the front, conferring with a man in expensive clothes. The deputy saw Jake enter and smiled coldly, said something to his companion that made both men turn and stare. "That's the judge," Abigail whispered. "The older man." Clayton Mercer was in his late 50s, with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone born to authority. His clothes were tailored, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him spoke of money and power and the absolute certainty that his decisions mattered. He studied Jake with the clinical interest of a man examining livestock at auction, assessing worth, finding it lacking. Jake forced himself to meet that gaze, to not look away, to stand straight and hold Sarah with confidence, even though his insides churned with fear. "Mr. Brennan," Sheriff Briggs appeared at Jake's elbow. "You'll sit here on the front bench. When the judge calls you, step forward and answer his questions directly. Don't volunteer information. Don't argue. Just answer what he asks." "What are our chances?" Briggs' expression was grim. "Honestly, not good. Mercer's already made up his mind about something. I can see it in how he's positioned himself. But you still have to try." Doc Walsh joined them, adding his medical report to a stack of papers on the clerk's table. Mrs. Evans sat in the second row, her face encouraging. Reverend Price stood near the back, Bible in hand, ready to testify if needed. They had allies. They had evidence. They had truth on their side. But Judge Mercer had the law. At precisely 12 o'clock, the clerk stood and called the room to order. Everyone rose as Judge Mercer took his seat behind the raised bench. The man moved with deliberate slowness, making everyone wait, establishing dominance before a word was spoken. "Be seated." Mercer's voice was deep and carried authority like a physical force. "We're here to determine the proper placement of an abandoned female infant, approximately 3 weeks of age, found on August 12th by Jacob Brennan. Mr. Brennan subsequently took the child to his ranch rather than immediately notifying authorities." The way he said it made Jake's rescue sound like kidnapping, made saving Sarah's life sound like a crime. "Mr. Brennan," Mercer's gaze fixed on Jake like a hawk spotting prey. "Approach the bench." Jake stood, his legs threatening to betray him. Abigail took Sarah from his arms. He walked forward alone, acutely aware of every eye watching. Every breath seemed loud in the silent room. "State your full name for the record." "Jacob William Brennan." "Age?" 46. "Occupation?" "Rancher, horse breeder." The words felt hollow. Jake hadn't successfully bred horses in 8 years. "Current financial status?" The question hit like a fist. Jake swallowed hard. "I owe $800 to First National Bank, due at month's end, about 18 days from now." Murmurs rippled through the room. Mercer made a note. "So you're facing foreclosure, loss of your property. Yet you chose to take responsibility for an infant. Explain your reasoning." "I found her on the railroad tracks. The westbound train would have killed her in minutes. I couldn't leave her there." "No one's questioning your initial rescue, Mr. Brennan. I'm questioning your decision to keep her rather than immediately placing her in proper care. I wanted to make sure she was safe first, healthy, before handing her over to strangers. Strangers like the county orphanage, the institution designed specifically to care for abandoned children." Mercer leaned forward. "Or were you hoping to leverage this child somehow, perhaps thinking a helpless infant would generate sympathy, make people forget about your debts?" Anger flared in Jake's chest. "No, I wanted to protect her." "From what? From a clean facility with trained staff? Or from losing the romantic story of the broken rancher who finds redemption through a baby?" Mercer's voice dripped with contempt. "I've seen men like you before, Mr. Brennan. Men who think good intentions excuse poor judgment." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Briggs had warned him not to argue, but hearing Sarah reduced to a prop in some imagined scheme burned like acid. "I'm not using her for anything. I'm trying to give her a home. A home you're about to lose. A home you share with a woman you're not married to. A home that, by all accounts, was falling apart until this child conveniently appeared. Mercer shuffled papers. Sheriff Briggs' report notes significant improvements to your property in the past week. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? I got married yesterday to Abigail Parker. She's my wife now. The statement caused another ripple of whispers. Mercer's eyebrows rose fractionally. How convenient. And how long have you known Miss Parker, or should I say Mrs. Brennan? 9 days. 9 days. Mercer let the words hang. You've known this woman 9 days and married her. Found a baby 9 days ago and claim you want to adopt it. Quite a lot of life-changing decisions in a very short period, Mr. Brennan. Almost as if you're desperate to create the appearance of stability. I am desperate to keep Sarah safe. Sarah, you've named the child. Mercer made another note. Tell me about your drinking, Mr. Brennan. How much whiskey would you say you consume in an average week? The change of topic was deliberate, designed to catch Jake off balance. He took a breath, steadying himself. I was drinking heavily for 8 years, since my wife and sons died of plague fever. Was drinking? Past tense? I stopped 9 days ago when I found Sarah. 9 days sober after 8 years of alcoholism, and you expect this court to believe that's a permanent change? Mercer's voice was almost gentle now, more dangerous because of it. Mr. Brennan, I've presided over hundreds of cases involving men who swore they'd stopped drinking. Men who believed one moment of clarity meant they were cured. They were all lying, usually to themselves, most of all. I'm not lying. Perhaps not intentionally, but 9 days proves nothing. A month would prove nothing. A year might start to suggest genuine change. Mercer leaned back in his chair. This court cannot place a helpless infant in a home where the primary caregiver is a recently reformed alcoholic facing imminent financial collapse. The risk is too great. Then let me prove myself. Give me time. Time is a luxury this child doesn't have. Every day she spends in an unsuitable environment is a day of potential harm. Mercer looked past Jake to where Abigail sat holding Sarah. Mrs. Brennan, please approach. Abigail stood with Sarah in her arms. She walked forward with her head high, but Jake could see the fear in the tight line of her shoulders. She stopped beside him, presenting a united front. Mrs. Brennan, you arrived in Red River 9 days ago as a mail-order bride for a deceased man, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And within hours of arriving, you agreed to live with Mr. Brennan and help care for this infant. Why? Because she needed help, and I could provide it. How noble. And the marriage yesterday? Whose idea was that? Abigail's chin lifted slightly. Mine. I suggested it would strengthen Mr. Brennan's case for keeping Sarah. Sir, so you married a man you barely know for strategic reasons, to help him maintain custody of a child neither of you has any legal claim to. Mercer's expression was unreadable. Tell me, Mrs. Brennan, what do you get out of this arrangement? The question was a trap. Jake could see it forming. Any answer Abigail gave would sound mercenary or foolish. I get a family, Abigail said quietly. I get to help raise a child who deserves love. I get to be part of something that matters. How touching. Mercer's tone suggested he found it anything but. And if I rule that Sarah goes to the orphanage, what happens to your convenient marriage? It remains. We made vows before God. Vows made for a specific purpose. Vows that lose their utility if Sarah is removed from the equation. Mercer turned his attention back to Jake. Mr. Brennan, I'm curious about something. The land where you found this child. That's railroad right-of-way, is it not? The shift in topic set off alarms in Jake's mind. The tracks cross my property, yes. Correction. The tracks cross land you currently occupy but may soon lose to foreclosure. Land whose deed will revert to First National Bank, which is owned by my investment company. Mercer's smile was cold. Technically, that makes the area where you found the child my property, which gives me certain legal considerations in this matter. Jake's stomach dropped. He understood now this wasn't just about Sarah's welfare, this was about power, about Mercer demonstrating control, about teaching a lesson to anyone who might challenge his authority. With respect, Your Honor, ownership of the land doesn't change the fact that Sarah needs a home. It changes everything, Mr. Brennan. It means this court has even greater obligation to ensure proper placement, to avoid any appearance of impropriety or favor. Mercer straightened papers on his bench. I've heard enough. Unless there is additional testimony that would materially change the facts of this case, I'm prepared to rule. Your Honor, Doc Walsh stood from the second row. I have medical testimony. Submit it to the clerk. I'll review it in my written decision. Your Honor, Reverend Price moved forward. I have character testimony regarding Mr. and Mrs. Brennan. Also submitted in writing. This hearing is concluded. Wait. The voice came from the back of the room. Young. Female. Frightened. Everyone turned. A girl stood in the doorway. Maybe 17, with dark hair and eyes that looked too old for her face. She wore a simple dress, her hands twisting nervously at the fabric. Who are you? Mercer's voice was sharp. My name is Lily. The girl's voice shook, but she kept speaking. That baby. Sarah, she's mine. I'm her mother. The room erupted in whispers. Jake felt the floor tilt beneath him. Beside him, Abigail went rigid with shock. Sarah, sensing the sudden tension, began to cry. Mercer banged his gavel. Order! Everyone sit down! He fixed his attention on Lily. You claim to be the child's biological mother? Yes, sir. Why did you abandon her? Lily flinched at the harsh word. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I was 17 and alone, and I couldn't keep her safe. Yet now you appear in my courtroom claiming maternal rights. Convenient timing. Mercer's voice was knife-sharp. Who sent you here? No one sent me. I heard about the hearing. Heard that Sarah was alive and safe. I came to see her, to know she was all right. And to claim her back? Lily's eyes went to Sarah, now wailing in Abigail's arms. Tears streaked down the young girl's face. No, I came to tell you why I left her, so you'd understand. Mercer gestured impatiently. Speak, then. Lily's hands were shaking violently now. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I was attacked by a man with power who knew no one would believe me if I told. When I realized I was pregnant, my family threw me out, said I'd shamed them. The father's name? Lily's gaze flicked to David Mercer, standing at his father's side. The deputy's face had gone pale. His jaw was clenched tight. David Mercer, Lily whispered. The room went silent, absolutely silent. Every eye swung to the deputy, who stood frozen, like a man facing execution. Judge Mercer's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Lily's voice was stronger now. He came to my family's homestead last winter, said he was investigating a theft. He was friendly at first. Then he changed. He forced himself on me, told me if I ever spoke about it, he'd make sure my father was arrested for stealing cattle he didn't steal. Father. David's voice was tight. She's lying. She's clearly been put up to this by Brennan. I've never met Mr. Brennan before today, Lily said. But I heard he found Sarah, heard he was trying to keep her. And I realized this might be my only chance to tell someone what happened, to make sure she stays with people who'll love her instead of being sent away. Mercer's face was stone. Do you have proof of these allegations? I have this. Lily pulled something from her pocket, a piece of cloth. She unfolded it carefully, revealing embroidery. The letter D worked in careful stitches. This is from his handkerchief. He dropped it that day. I kept it because I thought someday I might need evidence. Jake stepped forward, his hand trembling, as he pulled out his own piece of fabric. And I have this. He held up the handkerchief he'd found with Sarah. It was in the basket with the baby, the same monogram, the same expensive linen. The courtroom exploded in whispers. David's face went from pale to ashen. That's impossible, David stammered. That's not mine. He's lying. It was tucked under Sarah's blanket the morning I found her, Jake said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. I didn't understand what it meant then, but I kept it, And now I know. Judge Mercer took both pieces of fabric, comparing them side by side. The monograms matched perfectly, the fabric quality identical. "These are a set," Mercer said quietly, his voice deadly. "Custom made. I commissioned them for your 25th birthday, David. There are only 6 in existence." David lurched forward. "That proves nothing. Anyone could have that. Let me see it." Mercer's command was absolute. The clerk took the cloth and brought it to the judge. Mercer examined it closely, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes went to his son. "This is your monogram, your specific design. I recognize it." "Father, I can explain." "Explain how your handkerchief ended up with a girl you claim never to have met." Mercer's voice was deadly quiet. "Explain why she can describe the scar on your left shoulder from the riding accident when you were 12, a scar she could only know about if she'd seen you without a shirt." David's face crumbled. "It wasn't like she said. She was willing. She came to me. She was 16 at the time." Mercer's hands were flat on the bench, pressed hard against the wood. "A child. She's lying about her age. She told me she was 18. I told you I was 16. Lily's voice was steel now. "I told you to stop. You didn't care." The courtroom had gone from silent to suffocating. Everyone stared at the unfolding drama, at the powerful judge facing his son's crimes, at the young mother standing up to the man who destroyed her life. Mercer closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had changed in his face. The cold authority had been replaced by something more human, more broken. "Deputy Mercer, you're relieved of duty effective immediately. Sheriff Briggs, take him into custody." "Father, you can't." "I can and I will. You'll be held pending a full investigation." Mercer's voice was empty, hollow. "Get him out of my sight." Briggs moved forward, his face grim but satisfied. David tried to resist, but the sheriff was stronger. The deputy was marched out of the courtroom, his protests fading down the hallway. After they left, Mercer sat motionless for a long moment. The room waited. Jake hardly dared breathe. "Miss Lily." The judge's voice was different now, quieter. "I'm sorry for what my son did to you. Sorry that you faced that alone. Sorry that you felt your only option was to leave your baby on railroad tracks." Lily was crying openly now. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't feed her, couldn't protect her. I thought if I left her where someone would find her quickly, she'd have a chance." "You were right. Mr. Brennan found her, saved her life." Mercer looked at Jake, really looked at him for the first time. "You said you found her around dawn?" "Yes, sir, 7:15. The westbound train comes through at 8:30. You had just over an hour." Mercer's expression was unreadable. "If you hadn't stopped, if you'd ridden past, she would have died." "I couldn't leave her there." "No, I suppose you couldn't." Mercer turned to Lily. "What do you want, child? Do you want your baby back?" Lily looked at Sarah, still crying in Abigail's arms, looked at Jake and Abigail standing together, saw something in them that made her face crumple with fresh tears. "I want her to be happy, to be safe, to have parents who chose her instead of being stuck with her." Lily wiped her eyes. "I'm 17 with no money and no family. What kind of life could I give her? But Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, they're fighting for her. That's what she needs, people who'll fight." "So you're relinquishing parental rights?" "If it means Sarah gets to stay with them, yes. I'm relinquishing everything." Mercer nodded slowly. He looked down at his papers, at the neat legal documents that would have sent Sarah to Helena. His hands moved, gathering them up. Then, deliberately, he tore them in half. "I came here today intending to rule that Sarah go to the county orphanage. I was convinced that Mr. Brennan was an opportunist using a baby to solve his problems." Mercer's voice was rough. "I was wrong. About several things." He looked directly at Jake. "You saved that child's life. Then you changed yours to give her a home. You got sober, got married, made your ranch suitable for an infant, all in 9 days. That's not opportunism, Mr. Brennan. That's love." Jake's throat was too tight to speak. Beside him, Abigail had begun crying silently, tears streaming down her face while Sarah finally quieted in her arms. Doc Walsh's medical report states the child is thriving in your care. Reverend Price's testimony speaks to your character. Sheriff Briggs confirms you're making genuine efforts to improve your situation. Mercer set down his papers. And Miss Lily's testimony confirms that you're the right home for Sarah. Your Honor? Jake managed to force words out. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm granting you and Mrs. Brennan temporary custody of Sarah, pending formal adoption proceedings in 6 months. During that time, you'll meet monthly with Doc Walsh to verify the child's continued well-being. You'll work with Reverend Price to establish yourself in the community, and you'll stay sober. I will. I promise. Promises are easy, Mr. Brennan. Keeping them is hard, but I believe you'll try. Mercer picked up his gavel. One more thing. Your mortgage with First National Bank. I'm extending the payment deadline by 6 months. That should give you time to establish your horse breeding operation and generate income. Jake stared. Why would you do that? Because my son destroyed one family. I won't let his actions destroy another. Mercer's face was carved from granite. Consider it partial restitution for what Miss Lily suffered. It's not nearly enough, but it's what I can offer. He brought the gavel down with a sharp crack. This hearing is concluded. Sarah remains with the Brennan family. Case closed. The courtroom erupted. People surging forward to offer congratulations. Mrs. Evans crying openly. Dr. Walsh shaking Jake's hand. Reverend Price saying prayers of thanksgiving. Through it all, Jake stood in shock, unable to quite process what had just happened. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd won. Abigail pressed Sarah into his arms. The baby had calmed now, her blue eyes studying his face with that serious infant focus. Her tiny hand reached up and grabbed his finger with surprising strength. "Papa," Lily said softly. She'd approached while Jake was lost in the moment. "That's what she'll call you, Papa. Can I ask you something? Anything. Can I visit her? Sometimes? I know I gave up my rights, but I'd like to know she's all right, to see her grow up from a distance." Jake looked at Abigail, who nodded. "Of course. You're welcome at our ranch any time. Sarah should know her birth mother, should know that you loved her enough to make an impossible choice." Lily smiled through her tears. "Thank you for saving her, for giving her the life I couldn't." She reached out and touched Sarah's cheek, so gently. Then she turned and walked away, her shoulders straight despite the tears. A mother who'd given everything for her child, who'd faced her attacker in a courtroom full of strangers because it was the right thing to do. Jake would make sure Sarah knew that story, would make sure she understood the courage it took. But that was for later. For now, he just held his daughter and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in 8 years. Hope. The ride back to the ranch passed in a daze. Jake drove the wagon with Abigail beside him, Sarah sleeping peacefully between them. The Texas landscape rolled past, familiar but somehow transformed, as if the world had been remade while they weren't looking. "We did it," Abigail said quietly. "We actually did it. You did it. That marriage idea, that made the difference. We did it together." She looked at him, green eyes, serious. "That's what partners do, Jake. They face impossible things together. Partners." The word settled in Jake's chest, warm and unexpected. They'd started as strangers making a desperate bargain, but somewhere in the past 9 days, they'd become something else, something real. At the ranch, Jake unhitched the horses while Abigail took Sarah inside. When he entered the house, he found his wife sitting in the rocking chair, the baby nursing peacefully, humming softly. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly ordinary, that it took his breath away. This was his life now. This was his family. He knelt beside the rocketing chair, one hand on Sarah's back, feeling her breathe. "Thank you," he said to Abigail, "for everything, for staying, for fighting, for making this possible. Thank you for giving me a reason to fight." Abigail's hand covered his. "We're going to be all right, Jake. All 3 of us." That night, after Sarah had been put to bed, Jake walked out to the 3 graves behind the house. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. He knelt before Mary's cross, his hand on the weathered wood. "We won today," he said quietly. "Sarah's ours now. Legally. Forever. I wish you could have met her, Mary. She's got your stubbornness, the way she holds on when she wants something. Won't let go." The wind whispered through the grass. Gentle, almost like forgiveness. "Abigail's a good woman, different from you, more practical, less laughter maybe, but more steel. She's teaching me how to live again, how to hope." He traced the letters carved into the cross. "I'm going to try to be happy again, to build something with Abigail and Sarah. It won't replace what we had. Nothing could, but maybe it'll be enough. Maybe it's what you'd want for me." He pressed his forehead against the cross. "Thank you for Tommy and Samuel, for the years we had, for teaching me how to love. I'm using those lessons now, being the father Sarah needs, the husband Abigail deserves, because you showed me how." He stood wiping his eyes. Behind him, lamplight glowed in the house windows. Inside, his family was waiting, his second chance, his redemption. Jake Brennan walked away from the graves and toward the light, toward the future, toward hope. 6 months later, spring came to Texas with a riot of wildflowers and fresh beginnings. Jake stood in the barn, examining a new colt that had been born during the night. The foal was strong and healthy, the first successful birth from his breeding program in 8 years, the beginning of something that might actually work. "Jake!" Abigail's voice from the house. "Someone's coming." He walked outside to see a wagon approaching. As it drew closer, Jake recognized Judge Mercer, the man who'd changed everything, who'd given them a chance when he had every reason not to. Mercer climbed down stiffly, his age showing more than it had 6 months ago. "Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Brennan." "Your Honor." Jake shook his hand. "Wasn't expecting you. I have the final adoption papers. Thought I'd deliver them personally." Mercer produced a leather folder. "Sign these and Sarah is legally yours. No more temporary custody, full adoption." Jake's hand shook as he signed. Abigail added her signature, tears streaming down her face. Just like that, it was done. Sarah was theirs. Completely. Forever. "There's something else." Mercer's expression was grave. "My son pleaded guilty to the assault charges. He's been sentenced to 5 years. Lily will receive restitution from his assets. It's not justice, but it's something." "How is she?" "Working at the general store, saving money. She visits Sarah every Sunday after church, I'm told." "She's always welcome." Mercer nodded. "I also wanted to tell you, I'm stepping down from the bench. What happened with David, it made me realize I'd been blind to a lot of things, using power without wisdom. So I'm retiring, going to spend my remaining years trying to do better. That takes courage. So does what you've done. Building a life from broken pieces. That takes more courage than I ever had." Mercer looked toward the house where Sarah's laughter floated through an open window. "She's lucky to have you. We're lucky to have her." After Mercer left, Jake walked back into the house. Sarah was playing on a blanket on the floor, now 7 months old and impossibly mobile. She saw Jake and her face lit up with pure joy. "Papa!" The word was clear, unmistakable. Her first word. Jake scooped her up, holding her close, while emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "That's right, sweetheart. Papa's here. Papa's always going to be here." Abigail wrapped her arms around both of them. The 3 of them stood in the middle of the house, holding each other. A family forged from desperation and choice and love. "I'm pregnant," Abigail whispered against Jake's shoulder. "About 3 months along. We're going to have another baby." Jake pulled back to look at her, saw the joy and fear and hope in her eyes. "Are you scared?" "Terrified, but also happy. Sarah needs a brother or sister, and I want to give you that." "You've already given me everything." Jake kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You gave me a reason to live again. Everything else is just blessing on top of blessing." That night, after Sarah was asleep, Jake and Abigail stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch was thriving. The mortgage was being paid down slowly. The future looked possible for the first time in 8 years. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked. "Marrying me? Tying yourself to all this?" Abigail was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. "I came west looking for survival, found instead a home, a family, a purpose. No, Jake, I don't regret anything. Even though we started as a business arrangement, we didn't end as one." She leaned against him. "We're partners now, real partners. That's better than most marriages built on romance and promises." Jake wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. In the distance, he could see the 3 graves behind the house: Mary, Tommy, Samuel. His first family, always part of him, but no longer consuming him. "I think they'd approve," Abigail said softly, following his gaze. "Your first family. I think they'd be happy you found a way forward." "I hope so. I know so." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Life doesn't end because people die. It transforms, changes shape, becomes something new. We're proof of that," Sarah cried from inside. Not distressed, just wanting attention. Jake and Abigail moved together, partners in the endless work of parenting. They found Sarah standing in her cradle, arms reaching up. "Mama?" Sarah's second word, just as clear as the first. Abigail lifted her, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, baby. Mama's here. Mama and Papa are both here." Later, much later, after Sarah was fed and changed and rocked to sleep, after Abigail had gone to bed, Jake sat alone in the main room. He pulled out the note that had been pinned to Sarah's blanket that first morning. The desperate plea from a 17-year-old girl who'd had no choice. "I am 17 and alone. She deserves better than me. Please." Jake folded the note carefully and tucked it into the family Bible. Someday, when Sarah was old enough, he'd show it to her. Would tell her about the mother who'd loved her enough to let her go. About the morning she'd been found on railroad tracks. About how her arrival had saved not just her own life, but his as well. But for now, he just sat in the quiet house and listened to his family breathe, to the sounds of life happening around him, to the future unfolding exactly as it should. Jacob Brennan had spent 8 years living in the past, haunted by graves and guilt and grief that wouldn't heal. But a baby left on railroad tracks had pulled him into the present, had forced him to choose between remaining frozen or learning to live again. He'd chosen life, chosen love, chosen to fight for something beyond his own pain, and in choosing, he'd been redeemed. Outside, the Texas night was vast and star-filled. Inside, a family slept peacefully, and in the morning they would wake together and face whatever came next. Together, always together, the end.